Hi and welcome to Spill the Tea, brought to you by Penang Institute. I'm your host, Beh May Ting. Each month, we chat with people who break the mold and challenge the norm, all to give you fresh, thoughtful takes on the big questions behind policy making. Today, we're delighted to have Dr. Ong Kian Ming with us. He's a former Deputy Minister of International Trade and Industry and served 2 terms as a Member of Parliament. Currently, he is the Pro Vice-Chancellor for External Engagement at Taylor's University, and also co-hosts the Are We OK podcast, a personal favorite of mine during my morning commute. And for those who may not know, he was also part of the Penang Institute team, having led our KL office back in 2018. Kian Ming, great to have you on Spill the Tea.
Thanks for having me, May Ting.
Now, to start off, let's go for a quick fire round.
Sure.
First off, describe what you do in one sentence.
Running around physically and also mentally.
Okay. How many marathons have you completed so far?
1, and it was in Penang.
Okay. What would be your last meal on death row?
Vegetables, I think.
That's a super healthy option.
Yeah, I mean, don't want to go out with a bang. Just hopefully I won't end up on death row. But for the sake of argument, yeah, vegetables.
If you had an extra hour in a day, what would you do with it and why?
Go running.
Okay. And what's the best advice that you have ever gotten?
Don't be afraid to reach out and speak to people who may not necessarily agree with you.
Okay, that's very wise advice right there.
And that person, I don't mind sharing his name, was also associated and still associated with Penang Institute. His name is Liu Chin Tong, who is now the Deputy Minister for MITI.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we'll jump right into it. Recently, as we all know, the whole Trump's tariffs have shaken the world.
Yes, Malaysia has not been spared.
Not at all. So, basically people say that it's more of a fight between the giants.
Between
right?
US and China. Yep.
Exactly. So, while it is a geopolitical maneuver, and it's continuing to create, tangible ripple effects, even across Southeast Asia.
Sure.
So, how do you think Penang's ENE sector, which is often called the Silicon Valley of the East, how is it being reshaped,
Sure.
right, by this ongoing global trade diversion?
Yeah, so I think it's more than a ripple. I think what Trump announced has sent shockwaves across the globe, and Southeast Asia has not been spared. If you look at the reciprocal tariffs that has been temporarily postponed, you have countries like Cambodia and Vietnam with 49 and 46% respectively, and that will, more or less kill off their manufacturing sector in terms of exports to the US. And then, we are not spared at 24%. We have Thailand at 34%, Indonesia at 32%. So what this means is that we are not quite sure how the global supply chains would realign as a result of these tariffs, because we don't know what's going to happen in 90 days' time. But in the meantime, we are already affected at the 10% level. And even though semiconductors, broadly speaking, have been exempted, and they have come out with, the White House has come out with a series of HS codes specifying what these semiconductor products are, there are many products that are produced in Penang, in the ENE ecosystem, that have been hit by these additional tariffs. Right? We're talking about medical devices and even others that are not classified under those HS codes. My fear is that, Trump has signaled that he wants to come out with a special action under Section 232 of the US Tariffs Act to investigate the ENE sector and go after it in the same way as he has gone after the foreign imports of steel and aluminium. Right? So, we have to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best.
Okay. And in terms of, being prepared for the worst, how should Penang and, to an extension, Malaysia, respond to ensure that it is not merely a backup site for foreign firms, but a critical node in global value chains?
Sure. I think in the short term, if let's say these tariffs hit the semiconductor sector, it will be widespread across the entire value chain and supply chain. We would not be able to avoid getting hit by this tsunami in the short term. What this would mean is likely global demand for many of these products would temporarily be disrupted. Means orders will stop, whether it's in your Nintendo Switches or some of your smartphones and other electronic devices, because there's so much uncertainty in terms of what kind of price can be passed on to the consumer, how much will it be absorbed by the suppliers and also the vendors and the different companies in the ecosystem. So we have to be prepared to take that hit. What this means may be that we have to export as much as we can in the next 90 days in order for the customers in the US to stock up. But that can go only so far. After that, then I think we have to see how we can continue to get and remain competitive vis-a-vis our exports to the US. And more importantly, it may be a good time for us to try to see whether we can, have what I've called a minus US supply chain. What I mean by this is we've had a China plus one, supply chain kind of benefit because many companies have chosen Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, as an alternative site to export to the US. Whereas China is still there, mostly for the Chinese market and perhaps for the rest of the world. When I say minus US, what this means is that we may have to have a separate supply chain whereby we focus on developing linkages to sell to each other outside the US, meaning ASEAN, EU, North Asia, Japan, Korea, and also China. This will take some time because we are still dependent on the US as a market, and we have to keep that option open. But this may be one way in which we can try to pivot to an alternative economic ecosystem.
Right, and diving even deeper into that, given your experience as the Deputy Minister for MITI, and of course your insights into industrial policy, what sort of levers should Malaysia pull to convert these temporary trade shifts into long-term structural gains, particularly for Penang's ENE industry?
Okay, so I think when I talk about deepening supply chains, growing markets, this would have to start with ASEAN, because it is a market that I think is underappreciated. What this means is that there are a lot of non-tariff measures within ASEAN that prevents not just ASEAN countries from doing business with one another, but maybe other countries from getting into these markets. And the biggest would obviously be Indonesia, right? So if Indonesia sees this as an opportunity to open up its markets more, then I think other ASEAN countries can invest more in Indonesia. They can trade more with Indonesia and try to build that kind of supply chain where Indonesia plays a part, but it cannot try to grab everything itself and to try to shield itself off, and hence ASEAN won't feel the benefits of the Indonesian market. So that's one aspect. The other aspect would be Malaysia exploring new markets. We've just concluded our free trade agreement negotiation with the European Free Trade Area, which comprises Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. So that's a good start. We continue to negotiate with the EU. We just restarted the talks this year. And if let's say we can come up with some sort of a more faster time frame, that will also send a good signal to the markets. We need to deepen our linkages and open up markets with regards to RCEP and also CPTPP, and perhaps look at Mercosur, which is South America, where we've established better ties with Brazil, including in the oil and gas as well as ENE ecosystem. Right? So I think that is one part of the puzzle that we need to figure out in terms of deepening our supply chain. With regards to specifically Penang in the ENE sector, I would say that Penang needs to have bigger ambitions, and what this means is I think Penang needs to not only look after its own interests, but see Penang as the main driver for a larger economic ecosystem, meaning Penang as the heartbeat of manufacturing, but bringing in southern Kedah, this is Kulim, bringing in northern Perak, areas like Krian and Taiping, and try to build that economic ecosystem, starting with the E&E sector, but perhaps expanding into other manufacturing areas as well. And this would mean a bit, I would say quite a bit of out-of-box thinking, and also disrupting existing norms. For example, the political leaders, or at least some of them in Penang, have always objected towards the federal government providing funding for the building of the Kulim International Airport. I think that's quite short-sighted because if, let's say, the Kulim ecosystem can expand, and if companies in Penang, whether it's multinational or local companies, can use that as part and parcel of their expansion network, that will also grow things like the logistics sector, industrial parks, bring in new investments, and I think the possibilities are much bigger. Similar to what perhaps what Singapore is trying to do with Johor, with the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone. So I think, just trying to expand that kind of ecosystem, thinking broader, would help the Penang economic expansion in the long run.
So basically for Penang, it would be to build synergy around Penang, but also in the larger scheme of things, Malaysia, or especially this year as chair of ASEAN, should also be creating synergies with other countries around ASEAN as well as other parts of the world.
Yes. And I want to draw out something quite specific in terms of Malaysia's mindset, and this can also relate to Penang. When Prime Minister Anwar goes abroad and when he meets with different foreign leaders and corporates, I think he still has a little bit of the kind of 80s and 90s thinking, meaning, his responsibility is to try to draw FDI into Malaysia, which is important. But Malaysia is already a middle-income country with the very likely potential to reach a high-income nation status within the next 2-3 years. I would say Kuala Lumpur, most of Penang and the urban areas in Johor have already reached a high income level status in terms of GDP per capita, right? So what this means is that we need to look at the region as places where our companies, GLCs, listed companies, can invest in to build the larger Malaysian ecosystem. Singapore has been doing this for many, many years, and I think their domestic economy has not suffered. In fact, their firms are seen as more global. They've also had to, have to recruit more international staff and upskill and expose their own nationals to this kind of regional and global opportunities. So I think as part and parcel of this repivoting, repositioning, we also have to look more global. And for Penang, it would mean look outside the state and also outside the country in terms of connectivity and synergies that you're talking about.
So basically be less protectionist.
Be less insular and be more strategic in terms of the kind of value-added partnerships that we can have with other regions, with other cities, with other companies and even other countries.
And which draws us to the point of Penang facing a talent drought, particularly in the high-skilled technical fields. So do you think that this is also part of the failure of our education to industry pipeline, or does it reflect deeper systemic misalignments between what we train for and what industry demands?
Yeah, I think if we want to talk about the gaps that we need to address in the education system in Malaysia, it would take an entire other podcast and perhaps even more. I think many people are aware of the kind of shortcomings. I'll just summarize a few highlights. I think firstly, our education system, has worked for maybe the top 30%. Because of their own family backgrounds, because of the fact that many people have opted for the private sector, and many of them end up going overseas. Some do well in the private universities and also public universities locally. And these are the 30% that, do well in terms of their jobs and incomes. And then we have the other 70% that somehow, has not gotten what they should from the education system. And to be able to transition them to get good jobs, including, I think, in the TVET ecosystem, in the manufacturing ecosystem, would require not just a revamp of our entire education system, which I think the government is trying to do now, so that TVET can work more closely with industry. But I also think that we need a different kind of model whereby we allow industry to perhaps take more of the lead in doing the training. Meaning, in the case of Penang, you already have the Penang Skills Development Corporation here. We see companies like Vitrox, for example, setting up their own academy to do their own training. I think we need to have more of that. I think we need to have better models of PPP, public-private partnerships, so that we can quickly ramp up and cover some of these gaps that we have. And going back to my theme of trying to think more broadly, right? If you think about the population of Penang, the state only has about 1.5 million people. But if you broaden it to include southern Kedah, Kulim, you broaden it to include northern Perak. This would be one way in which you can have a bigger catchment area to be able to attract more people to not just work but also come and study here. I just came from Empowering Education Summit here in Penang, and that's one of the reasons why Penang was chosen as a possible education hub for the region, specifically focusing on building talents to feed into the manufacturing sector.
And this really goes into our next point, which I want to talk about, which is, like you mentioned just now, we should actually be looking at the regional perspective.
Yes, and opportunities.
And opportunities, so like, how can Penang basically leverage our position, to integrate more meaningfully, apart from working together perhaps with the Kulim Industrial Park and perhaps Perak as well, to build a northern regional growth corridor, rather than operating in isolation. Yeah.
So I think the manufacturing sector is still the building blocks, but I think there are other opportunities which have not really been explored, and I want to highlight a few. The first one I want to point out is the potential for modern agriculture, industrial agriculture, agri-tech to be deployed, especially given the fact that you see northern mainland Penang to be an area which seems to be neglected. And this is one area where even some of the tech companies here can help in terms of trying to bring in some of these processes. I like to compare Malaysia to a country like the Netherlands, which has a strong manufacturing sector. ASML is based there. They have many world-class companies, some of whom are also invested here in Malaysia. But at the same time, they also have a very strong agriculture sector, whether it's in the production of milk, flowers, tulips, and other areas. And they are an industrial powerhouse mainly because they have mechanized and they've deployed a lot of industrial technology in this area. I think Malaysia can do the same, and I think Penang can be one of the areas that can showcase this because it's relatively easy to manage the smaller land sizes and also proximity to companies and industry and also connectivity. So that's one. The second area is in the area of services, and Penang has gotten some traction in terms of shared services. The Citibank deployed its first shared service office here in Penang doing backroom processing way back in 1980s. It's still around. I know companies like Swarovski, for example, they have chosen Penang as their shared service center. We have a lot of manufacturing companies that use Penang as their base for manufacturing services, meaning shared procurement, regional and even global procurement. So I think that kind of ecosystem can be built up. It's not really been praised enough. And of course, for this, we need the kind of human capital and talent. And I think probably the third area I want to highlight is the potential of deployment of startups, especially those that try to serve the manufacturing ecosystem. A lot of them are based in Singapore and KL currently, but I think with the manufacturing base in Penang, you can come up with ideas in terms of startups that are doing energy efficiency solutions, IoT solutions, and other kinds of solutions in the ecosystem. I'm not talking about fintech. We don't have that kind of size here and scale in Penang. That will probably still happen in KL and maybe to a lesser extent Johor using the Singapore ecosystem. But this is an area where I think not enough thought has been put in. Not enough capital has been deployed, and of course it will take some time, but it also requires leadership on the part of the state and federal government in order to activate some of the human capital necessary to catalyze these kinds of projects.
Yeah, exactly. So, how proactive can or should the Penang state government be in leading economic diversification, giving its limited fiscal tools? And should it focus on regulatory agility, investment, facilitation, or ecosystem building?
Sure. I think, let me start with the last one first in terms of ecosystem building. I think the government cannot build the entire ecosystem by itself, but what it can do is it can catalyze. Meaning, for those who are in the state governments, it means putting their ear to the ground, listening to what are the kinds of innovations and solutions that the private sector is doing, whether it's the large companies or some of the small companies that are going into that ecosystem. Having been in government myself, I know that because you're very caught up with attending different events and also different official functions, you don't really have the time to put your ear to the ground to really understand and get a sense of new innovations. I've managed to find more time in KL, given my position as Pro Vice-Chancellor of External Engagement, to talk to different people in the private sector, including startup people who are in some of the areas I talked about, such as energy efficiency solutions, HVAC solutions that are I think helpful to industry, even renewable energy solutions, for example. If let's say that kind of closeness between some of the government leaders and industry can be cultivated, then with some discernment, these political leaders, even civil servants, they can highlight some of the success cases, right? By bringing some of the success cases to the attention of the media channels, especially those that are in KL that may not be aware of what's happening in Penang, you are able to give these projects national and even regional and sometimes even international prominence, right? Whenever these things are deployed, whenever interesting projects are highlighted, if they are covered in the press and then amplified through social media, I think this is something that can slowly gain momentum and capture the attention of the larger public. So building the ecosystem is one. Second is working with the federal government to enhance the regulatory frameworks. So I'll give you an example. One of the state agencies called KPRG Environment in Johor recently signed an MOU with Sembawang Utilities from Singapore to explore the possibility of deploying large-scale solar or solar farms on water bodies in Johor. So this would be in dams and lakes and things like that. Of course, Penang has limited size, but Penang does have a few dams and some water bodies, and this could be an area where regulatory enhancement between the state government first, with the federal government, the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, to see whether some of these floating solar farms can be deployed in some of the dams, including those that are feeding or water catchments for your water supply here, right? So all these things require people to push the agenda forward. Of course, it's easier said than done. It's easy to propose ideas, but much harder to do the legwork. But given the fact that Penang is in a situation where a lot of low-hanging fruit has been plucked already, that's where you need more value-added propositions to be put on the table.
So beyond tech that you were talking about, I was thinking also whether in digital services or green economy, as you mentioned just now, and or the creative industries and logistics, do you believe which industries do you believe has the highest potential in Penang right now, and what would the bottlenecks be?
I would say logistics has good potential because of a couple of things. One, the expansion of the Penang airport. Second, the building of the LRT, including later on connecting to the mainland. Thirdly, the interest in trying to enhance the connectivity of the Kulim ecosystem, right? And that's where the Kulim, airport comes in, because when you have an airport there are opportunities for warehouses, other logistic opportunities, and yes, there will be some competition between Kulim and Penang, but I think there are more opportunities for cooperation, right? So logistics is definitely one. I would say the creative economy has some limitations because, again, population size, deployment opportunities. But there could be other ways in which we can showcase Penang. For example, making it easier for filming to take place in Penang. But that requires, again, coordination and from a regulatory perspective with the federal government. Because, I'm not sure whether your audience knows this, every single script that, let's say a foreign production company wants to bring into Malaysia, working together with a Malaysian company, you need the approval of FINAS. Right, which I think sometimes that process can take a long time, which disincentivizes a lot of people from using Penang, which I think is a great shooting location for as a hub, for shooting different movies and things like that.
Yeah. And apart from industries like this, actually Penang has a lot of urban attractiveness, I would say, and stickiness factor. So, it has its lifestyle advantages, which are often said to be key for talent attraction. And yet, we see the other way, which is that a lot of people from Penang like to move out to Singapore or the Klang
KL,
Valley.
yes.
Yeah. Despite all that we have spoken just now, do you think it is also because of wages?
I think initial wages, perhaps, especially those who are working in the service sector who wants to go into financial services, for example. KL is still the base, and then after that, some of them will go to Singapore. But I think increasingly in the manufacturing sector, Penang can provide, I think, attractive wages, especially since they have been bid up post-COVID. The fight for talent is real. And as the E&E sector has expanded aggressively in Penang, we hear of starting salaries of about 4,000 or 5,000 ringgit, sometimes even more. But here is where I think we need to have more proactive engagement, not just policies, but actual activity on the ground. What do I mean by this? So, for example, both Penang as well as Selangor have aspirations to lead their own IC design ecosystems, right? And I think Selangor is actually starting from a lower base compared to Penang, because the E&E ecosystem in Penang is much more mature. You have a lot more IC design companies that are here. But what I see in Selangor under the Selangor IT and Digital Economy Corporation, SIDEC, they have been much more aggressive in going out to court different international and regional players to work together with them in the IC design center in Puchong. And I don't see the kind of proactiveness on this front in Penang. Maybe I'm not aware of it, but from my tracking, the activity here in Penang seems less visible and less coordinated, and which is why I talked about that catalytic kind of role that the Penang state government can play, right? You don't really see any particular person other than the chief minister perhaps going out to really champion and show the pathway forward for this kind of higher value added E&E activities in Penang, whereas I see a similar effort being done in Selangor, via YB Eng Zihan, for example, and some people in the SIDEC ecosystem. So those are some of the observations that I've had. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. With that, thank you so much, Kian Ming, for joining us today. I've been speaking to Dr. Ong Kian Ming, former Deputy Minister of International Trade and Industry. This is Build the Teh, a podcast by Penang Institute.
Thanks for having me.